So last month, Marg Franklin became the first woman to be the CEO and president of the CFA Institute. Her service to the CFA Institute is highly distinguished. She was on the board of governors for the Institute and also served as chair of the board. She also was a former president of CFA Society Toronto. She also was a founding member of the CFA Institute Women in Investment Initiative and a recipient of the Alfred C. Morley Distinguished Service Award in 2014. Marg has been a leader in the investment management industry for 28 years and includes experience in both institutional and private wealth, where she most recently was president of BNY Mellon Wealth Management in Canada. Marg, I don't know if I'm going to be stealing any part of your upcoming remarks. When you spoke to the society leaders earlier this month in Austin, it was crystal clear how passionate you are in the mission of the CFA Institute and that you want to bring accountability, urgency, and excellence to the CEO position. I truly believe that the 170,000 members of the Institute worldwide will be in great hands under your leadership. And now, please welcome to the stage Marg Franklin.
Thank you very much. It is a great pleasure to be here. I have seen actually many former, I would say, fellow volunteers from my days when I chaired Toronto and certainly at the board. Atlanta is a vibrant society and we're thrilled. I don't think I ever would have imagined that we'd be rebranding to CFA Atlanta Society. It is just a complete honor to be here. I had the privilege of meeting Solon Patterson earlier this evening, who reminded me about the FAF days, Financial Analyst Federation days. So Marty and I had a good laugh about that. It is my great pleasure to welcome Marty Flanagan to the stage. Marty and I actually had a couple of conversations in preparation for this event. I think we found each other both irreverent. I will say that actually at home they call me Margie Franklin. And so when they say Marty Flanagan, we realized you could just kind of slur the words and you could talk to either one of us. So all that gender diversity, now we're just anyway, Marty has had an illustrious career, obviously. Franklin, Templeton, Hansberger. Tom Hansberger, for many of you who are in old school CFA world, will remember the textbook. He's been a passionate CFA member and volunteer who's made an impact for really many decades later. A kindred spirit, I would say, in making sure that our business is vibrant, relevant, and ethically oriented. This evening earlier, Marty and I exchanged comments that it's very difficult to discern between those who are educated, ethical, and act with integrity when markets are great. Inevitably, a market correction will come one of these days, and that's really what sort of separates the wheat from the chaff. So, Marty, I welcome you up here for what I hope will be a lively discussion. I will tell you that earlier this week I had the privilege of interviewing Peter Brower, who is the chairman of Bloomberg. And Marty, in our discussion, said, if I can't answer the question, I shouldn't be a CEO. Well, apparently, if you're a chairman, you can prescribe the questions. He was amazingly entertaining, but I think Marty will be even more so.
We'll see.
Great. So we're going to just exchange a few ideas here on things that we think are really important in the investment management industry that we hope all of you will take away some insights and some thoughts about where we're headed and quite forward-looking that Marty and his perch has an interesting perspective on. So the first one we thought we'd talk about is a little bit about passive. As many of you know, passive investments have just tripped over to be more than half of the assets under management. You actually have both in your shop and have just done in the last year and a half a acquisition of an active management shop. So inside secret or just contrarian because?
Or we're just confused, right? So, our perspective, let me back up. I think, popular wisdom is sort of active or passive, and passive is dead. I'm paraphrasing, and that's what's happened over the last decade, and I'd say much of what's happened with passive, I'll say cap-weighted indexes over the past decade it's really a post-financial crisis phenomenon, and we can get into details. It's been really a challenge for many active managers, and so you come to this conclusion that the world's different this time. Our strong belief is the answer to the question is passive, active, and alternatives. And the way that we see our clients, and many of my colleagues here are clients and people in the wealth management business, the answer to the question is it's all of that, and that's how portfolios are being built today. We're just in an extreme period within active that it's going to correct itself. So we have a high belief that active really matters.
Any insights? I mean, consolidation is a big theme right now. So be interested in sort of any lessons or insights that you had from the Oppenheimer acquisition, because it's been relatively recent and obviously a very thoughtful strategy for you.
So I've now been in the industry too long, and have had a record, or been involved in a number of acquisitions. In fact, Franklin bought Templeton when I was at Templeton, so I've been on the other side of it. And so each time we learn something. But here's our fundamental thought is when you're looking at combining with another organization, truly understand what the other organization is bringing. And it needs to be differentiated to your organization. That's the first step. The next thing is actually to understand what, even before you conclude you should get together, we spend an awful lot of time in understanding culture. There's a long track record of unsuccessful combinations in the industry, and I think where it breaks down is not necessarily strategy, but on culture. And you can only get so far when you're just getting to meet people, but you can get a really deep sense of, do they care about customers? Do they care about each other? Do they care about making a difference? And if those fundamental principles are in place, you'll work through all those other elements. And then once you then decide to get together, don't forget step one, which is what was the value that you were interested in, and make sure you do not destroy it. And the next thing I'd say is go fast and be as transparent as you can and make your decisions. It's a people business, and it's very difficult. This was the largest one we've ever done. It had the most people implications that we've ever been associated with. And we're a much more talented organization right now. I like the outcome of it, but I will tell you, it's very, it wears people out. In fact, some of our colleagues here, some people tonight just moved here from Denver, just moved here from New York. So you're really, lives are being impacted, and not everybody comes along. And that's easy to say, but it's actually very personal. So those are the tough ones, I'd say, in the whole thing.
Marty and I are contemporaries, so you might remember back in the 90s, Goldman Sachs report on the behemoths and the boutique. And in my naivete, I thought that would take like 5 years for that transformation to occur. And I feel like, 25 years later, we're actually seeing that. So clearly scale has become one of those things that's critical and maybe manifested in a different way than we might have imagined back in the 90s. So share with the audience your thoughts on scale, and then in particular here in Atlanta, dominated by a few big employers, and then I heard earlier today something like 400 RIAs in Atlanta proper.
Wow. Yeah. So as long as I've been in the industry, right, both of us, we've been hearing about there's going to be consolidation in the industry. It largely has not happened, and probably for good reasons historically. And I get to one of our fiduciaries. That is a very important thing. There was we're seeing today, and I'd say this consolidation topic, or whatever you want to call this Russian talk, but it is again what's kicked it off. It's a post-financial crisis outcome, and it's probably become more acute in the last handful of years. And what we look at is it was this sort of beta run that's put pressure on many active managers, the rise of passive. And so you have this idea of it's cheap and it's safe. We can debate that later, put it off to the side. But then all of a sudden, costs on cyber. I mean, how much money is everybody spending on cyber? And we're not banks. Well, some are banks. Cyber, all the regulation, this has gone to a different level. But our clients want different things from us. They want straight outcomes. They want all sorts of digital analytical tools, et cetera, et cetera. So the cost of doing business has gone up dramatically. And we're also seeing, I'd say probably the most acute thing, every client that we deal with around the world is dealing with fewer money managers. And I'd say that's probably the biggest element that's creating this change right now.
Not on the questions that we had, but I'm going to take a riff here because you did tell me every good CEO should be able to improvise.
I was kidding though.
Yeah. Game on. So one of the interesting things is post-2008, what clients want, and whether they can even articulate that. I mean, you have a distribution, clients that run the gamut from grandma to, receiving a pension to grandma who actually has savings and everything in between.
Yes.
Talk a little bit about what you see as client expectations and how we're going to address that in a kind of go-forward scenario where our business is not disrupted from players that aren't in our ecosystem.
Yeah, so this is a good question. So what we're seeing with our institutional clients around the world, so as you say, you take a sovereign wealth fund to public pension plan, they just want much more from us. Before it was we were a good manager of X, and you got hired, you didn't get hired. It's now, they really want us to deliver the whole firm. The table stakes, are you a good investor? Ideally, they'd like to have more mandates that you can manage for them, but that's not enough either. It literally is analytical tools, helping them about leadership, then you go to more wealth management platform. We're literally doing those types of work for, the big, RIAs and corner office, whatever you want to refer to it as. And also, we have things called like investment consulting that are literally helping people with practice management to help their businesses be more successful. So the demands are incredible on it. But you mentioned something else. It's the, when is the outsider going to disrupt our industry, right? And so we have a quite successful business in China, and been there for a long time. Before I got there, Andrew Lowe, who runs Asia Pac for us, he's an incredible leader. About 5 years ago, on one of our regular trips, we were in Beijing, and so it hit me between eyes. The use of mobile digital technologies using financial services in China is so far advanced than anywhere else in the world. It was like, oh my God, this is incredible. And my analogy was way back when it was with cellular, what's coming on, that Argentina didn't have landlines or phones, they jumped straight to cellular. China has not had an embedded sort of financial services network, like we do here in the United States. They've skipped the whole thing. And it just taught us, this is amazing. And we can make all it, so it's not going to leave China because of all these reasons, right? And that's probably not a really good strategy. So it led us to getting into digital platforms to help our clients. And one of my colleagues here is from GemStep. It's something that was an outgrowth of that. So really adopting technologies that will help advance the business is something we've done. But actually, what's my real point? And financial, they've already done this, right? So what we're worried about in the United States, it's already happened. And it was really a payment processing part of Alibaba, the financial services hub. And I think it's the largest money fund in the world, right? And it happened overnight. And we know how say collectively, good news for people giving advice and managing money. There's a place that is part of the PhD question, but it's happened. So.
Yeah. So interestingly enough, let's like pivot from China big global to you've had a presence in Atlanta for a long time, but really set your headquarters up here, and with some people going to Nashville and other places. So talk a little bit about that strategy and thinking.
Yeah. So when I joined a long time ago, 2005, Invesco was listed in London on the London Stock Exchange, and the technical headquarters were there, and it was grew through acquisitions, so you had very important subsidiaries around. Invesco was founded here by a man named Charlie Brady and a number of his colleagues from the old CNS Bank. Ultimately, Charlie ended up, they sold their business to a UK-based money manager, ultimately changed the name to Invesco. Charlie became chairman. So that's how that London bit happened. And when I came, long story, you need to sort of figure out which way you're heading going forward and pick a direction. And we moved the listing to New York Stock Exchange, we moved the headquarters to Atlanta, and it hit many things that mattered to us. Just the talent here, the university systems here, it was quite a dynamic place to live. You could attract talent, a great place to travel from, so all the basics were in place, and it's been really wonderful, and the families that have moved here and even have really enjoyed it. So we will move another 500 people here in the next couple of years, and probably about 200 in the next 12 months. As I said, we already have some colleagues here tonight from Denver and New York, and so far so good. They're only a couple months into it, so they hopefully don't change their mind. So hurry up, buy a home so you can't leave. So.
I'm going to take one moment. George, I realized I didn't put the app on here, so I can't see the Slido question, so if somebody can give me, and my glasses are in my purse.
Shoot. Okay. Let's
We
get my
can
glasses.
share. Okay, good. I'll take just maybe one last question, and I'll start to, while you're giving the answer, I'll start to look at a few of these. One of the things that actually is really interesting for CFA Institute is what does the profession, firm, and professional of the future look like? So for those of you who haven't seen it, we have 3 research publications, which I think are some of our best work. It's under Future of Finance. And the last one published is the investment professional of the future.
Yeah.
And that is such an interesting thing when you think about some employers and saying, Python is the best skill we can get. So, back to your point about passive, we'll go back to this time isn't necessarily different, but put that a little bit in context for us of what the investment professional of the future looks like.
Yeah, look, I think it's a great question, and I think we tend to ask ourselves these questions in times of disruption, and I'd say we're in that right now for various different reasons, and you can frame it however you want. I think the CFA Institute, and every member that's a CFA, you start from a great place. I mean, the designation, who would have, so what's the membership now, 170,000?
177,000 and 350,000 candidates globally.
And how many countries now? I mean,
84 countries, probably changed. 197 societies. Yeah, so I think we have somewhere, okay, let's call it. There were 100 countries and 157 societies.
So, good news is it starts from a great spot, and that only happened for good reason, right? It was incredibly valuable. The educational element is, it's foundational. And the other things that create along, the focus on ethics and values, and really the community that comes along. So it starts from just an incredible spot. And so I think being forward-looking is always a good thing, but at the same time, adopting skills along the way, whether it be new technologies that you're on, I think that's a really important thing. And people are pointing to, should I be scared of what AI can do and machine learning? Am I going to go out of business? The answer is no. Embrace it and do a better job. It's like way back when, Was a spreadsheet going to put you out of business? I mean, somebody might have thought that way back when, right? I mean, it's, there's these stair steps of technology advancements that we were talking about earlier. Grab them and make yourself better. And I don't know, it's going to be some time, in my opinion. I'm sure smarter people than me will tell me absolutely wrong. But wisdom, judgment, perspective, and then when you're working with clients, empathy, those are really hard things to replace. Yeah. And if you can get to your answers more quickly with technology, but have all the fundamental skills of a CFA, I think it's a very bright future.
So I will just say, again, CFAinstitute.org, investment professionals of the future. Many of you will actually be leaders who are managing teams. We talk about this AI plus HI, artificial intelligence plus human intelligence, and these soft skills, which is not naturally people who are attracted to our business. We have all kinds of tools and strategies for you. So again, go with that. Question actually for both of us, and it relates a little bit to what we talked about when we had our prep call, which is the Business Roundtable obviously came out with their statement. I don't know if you've had a chance to look at the one that came out in 1983, but remarkably similar, and that just launched a period of extreme capitalism. So I don't know what this means for this one. But we did have a discussion on it, and we got a question from the audience just with regards to our role in communities in a kind of globally important companies. But for each of us, how do we see as leaders what that means for us in our own communities?
Do you want to start?
Nope, you go right ahead.
Okay.
I'm going to look for some more questions.
Yeah. So Mark did bring it up on the call, and I saw the headline, read the article, but hadn't really read the text, nor did I read most of it in 1991. I had since then.
Yeah.
And so let me do that. So so it started me thinking, right, pondering, I better pay attention to this, we're going to talk about it. And so I thought, it doesn't feel too different to me, and so I think of how we think about our company, and now there's many of my colleagues here, so you can test this one. What we have said always is focus on the client, do a good job for the client, run a good business. What that means is a talent business, attract talent, develop talent, make a difference for them, and that is be involved with the community. It's good for attracting talent, it's good for the community. Education, we just had 3 days here of our women leaders from around the world in education here in town. And if you do all these things well, the share price is going to take care of itself. And so when I read the new ones, it sort of feels like that.
Yeah.
But I think that's probably, then I read the 1991 thing. I really didn't understand it. It felt like it was all over the place as far as I was concerned. I don't know how you felt.
The 83 one is a lesson. I felt like it was out of a prof wrote it.
So look, my answer to it is you are not going to be a competitive organization if you're not focused on the client, taking care of the employees and being a part of the community. And I really think most businesses do that. Maybe it's our industry, and it might start by this fiduciary notion that starts with us. So I suspect there probably are some businesses that just don't care about that stuff, and that's probably not a good thing.
Yeah. So 12 weeks ago, I was actually on the practitioner side, and 8 weeks ago, I assumed this particular position. Our mission statement is to lead the investment profession with education, ethics, and integrity, and professional excellence for the ultimate benefit of society. And I can tell you that I was part of a group of 4 of us who finished that last statement of almost 10 years ago. And we were sort of ashamed that we hadn't put that tagline on around for the ultimate benefit of society. It was kind of the finishing your thought, which was a pretty good organizing principle. And then I chaired the board in 2010 and was on the board in 2008, 2009. I can tell you we were just not feeling great about ourselves that we had missed something, and that for what we stood for somehow we hadn't delivered. And a little bit like the Goldman report, it takes a long time for those things to settle in. So I think at the end of the day, you hope you have globally competitive practices, those that really bring the best of what we do for clients. But at the end of the day, most of it is locally delivered, in whether that's a sovereign wealth fund that wants to have the interaction with you to know that you are ethical, that you are well educated, and that you strive for professional excellence. I had the opportunity of being in the Europe, Middle East, and Africa Society Leaders Conference, and I can tell you what they're doing in Africa would inspire everybody in here. They have access to their regulators. We are welcomed in developing markets. They want us to shape their capital markets. They, if you think about your emerging market portfolio, the demographics, the growth are enormous, and we, CFA Institute, is welcome there in everything that we bring to it. It's enormously exciting in a way that is almost difficult to grasp when you're here, kind of like your China moment. You get over and you go, like, this is so exciting. So I think at the end of the day, though, what's happening in Ghana and Nigeria and Bulgaria and London and the UK and Germany is very different than what's happening here. So it really is local. And I think individual leadership, that Margaret Mead line, change can happen with a few people. Indeed, that's the only way change has ever really happened. I think resonates much more now in a world that feels remarkably small. We have a question around private equity. As there are fewer and fewer public companies available, how does this shape your thinking on the active-passive debate, and maybe what it ultimately means for those institutional investors that you're trying to make sense of it all?
Look, it's a great question, and I think there's some real topics around there, right? So half the number of public companies here in the United States than there were, whatever it was, 15 years ago. I'm losing track at the time, but and so much money going into private equity, and so it's really easy in this environment to come to this conclusion. It's cap-weighted indexes or private equity, and everything else is sort of lost. I do think we go through cycles. I do think there's an absolute focus. I'd say, I know at the SEC, Jay Clayton is very focused on this topic. How do you get the broader audience of investors access to companies earlier stage? There's quite a concern that by the time these companies go public, we're seeing what's happening now. There's probably a question around the valuation, right? The track record has not been so good so far coming out. I think there's some later stage investors in WeWork that might have wished they had a public mark before they invested. So I do think some of that will sort it out. And it also feels when I see, and look, we're in private markets also, but when so much capital goes into a specific area, it tends to sort of correct itself a little bit. It's not going away, but I really think what you're going to do, if you just see the extreme views, right, valuation differences right now, in the marketplace with listed securities, it will reverse itself. And I think the active alpha that it will be generated will be quite material.
We've both been asked what our respective organizations are doing with regards to diversity and inclusion.
You want me to start?
You can start. You're
Okay.
doing great so far as the lead.
Are we doing a survey result afterwards? So
Survey at one says killing it.
as a colleague of mine says, facts are friendly, and sometimes not always. But look, needless to say, it's an incredibly important topic for every organization. And so let me, to put in context, we have offices in 25 countries right now. So by the fundamental nature of Invesco, it's diverse. One of the fundamental principles we found of ourselves, we value diversity of thought. So naturally, just because of the different cultures and the people that we have around the world, it's a good place to start. So now, what are the facts are friendly bit that are not so friendly? When we looked at where we were failing, it was gender diversity globally. So if you go back to, and so what we decided to do was we needed to address gender diversity globally, and not to limit others, but the practices around diversity and around gender diversity, they will transcend, right? And some of them are, basically how you hire people and how you develop people. That wasn't enough. What we realized in 2007, and I thought we were making progress, we really weren't. If you looked at senior managers in our company, September of 2017, about 25% of our senior managers were women. And what we decided to do was, I said, I need to sort of lead this. I need to own this. And with the top team, what we decided to do publicly, if you go to our proxy statement, we publicly committed to get our senior women leaders between 30 and 40% by the end of 2020. So it's not just us quietly talking about it internally, you can read it. So that puts a lot of pressure on an organization. That's really a way to do it. But what I did was I just get pretty practical in talking to the senior leaders in the organization. I'm pretty open about it. I said, how many people do you think I hire? How many people do you think I bring along? I try to, but it's really everybody in the room. And where we started was, let's not worry about the people we're hiring. Let's take care of the people that are here first. And let's start with inclusion. And how hard is it to walk down the hall and pull somebody into a meeting? And how hard is it to bring somebody, a conversation out around the table, whether it be a shy person or a woman? These basic principles start to energize the organization. And we're not done, but I think we're on a much better path than we were. It's quite active. And right now, September this year, we're globally, I think we're at 31%. We have till the end of next year to get there. So we're past 30. We want to get closer to 40. In the United States, we went from 25 to 34. So progress, not done. But my big push is take care first of the people in your organization and just be very purposeful. And it's not an HR problem, it's an us problem.
So let me absolutely applaud your efforts on actually looking at your talent, your existing talent pool, because I think it's a really overlooked part, and everybody's trying to hire on the gender diversity in particular, which is the universal diversity issue no matter where you go. I actually think really, really, really smart, and I'm going to bet that you get great loyalty out of your retention rate is very high just by the intention. So this is something really near and dear to my heart. I'm in my mid-50s, and when I started in the business, I tell you, I never felt a headwind at all. And Leah Bennett, who actually happens to be on our board now, and I and a number of women were sitting around at our annual conference, and Kathy Chrisman was probably there, Susan Barali's here, I know Janet Miller is big in this. We just never thought anything about it until we hit our 40s, and then there were really no women there. We were like, Maasai among the pygmies. Like we just stood out, and we all congregated together. And we thought it was a great business, right? Like CFA tends to be more buy side than sell side. And we thought it was a great business. We'd had interesting lives. We'd gone on to have families. We kind of had it all. We had family and careers. We didn't have anything else. We weren't in great shape. So Leah and I started the Women in Investment Management Initiative 5 years ago, which was, and the CFA Institute backed it. And I can tell you the progress in 5 years has been extraordinary. 5 years ago, we were bringing research together just to say there was a case for it. And ours was really actually never about fairness. Roger Irwin of Willis Towers Watson and head of their Global Thinking Ahead Institute, and really, I would say the father of the future of finance, kept saying, Marg, like, why don't you talk about fairness? Well, first of all, we're all pretty privileged, and you get up there and you sound pretty shrill and whiny, so it's not the best marketing effort anyway. But what it really was about improving investor outcomes. Right. And that any ecosystem with a lack of biodiversity either ends up with, perverted outcomes, or it ends up withering and dying. And when you think about investor outcomes and that fiduciary responsibility, it really does behoove you to add diversity. But it's hard to manage diversity. It really is. It requires different muscles. It requires different training. It requires different thinking. And it's hard work persistently. It doesn't really, you don't get good at it and then you just kind of go away. So I can tell you, when I started in the business, I started at BGI, Barclays Global Investors, and Patty Dunn was the CEO. Yeah, and we never even talked about it because half the management committee was women. We thought diversity was, they all wore St. John suits and they had diamond tennis bracelets and jewel encrusted brooches. I'm like, I don't think I'd look good in that. I don't know if I can be on that team. That was our kind of diversity.
It was a lot easier.
It was a lot easier back then. So when we think about that, again, in different jurisdictions for CFA Institute, they take it very differently. In India, it's very different than Africa. It's very different in Atlanta than it will be, for instance, in a much more rural place. So I think we're all committed to it because it does center on doing a much better job for investors by making sure that we're very intentional about that diversity.
So we, and Kelly, correct me, so our Women's Network, 10 years, is it? Yeah, so 10 years ago we started Invesco's Women Network, and it started in the United States for us and started to go around the world, and it now is. And to your point, I remember, it must be, I don't know, 6 years ago in India, we started the Women's Network for Invesco in India. You want to see a group of people that were excited beyond belief. It was unbelievable, the things that we take for granted, right? Yeah. So cultures around the world are very, very different, and it's really been one of the most powerful things that we've done.
Yeah, so interesting stuff. And we have time for 2 more questions. One is for me and one is for you. So I was asked about mandatory continuing education. Of course, I'm asked that in every forum. So let me just declare some historical perspective. I chaired the Toronto Society and was part of the extra large societies at the last vote, which was shot down. And I would say that at that time, there were 4 major obstacles, which was, we don't believe you have the content, we think it's going to be a cash grab, it's difficult and administrative, and everything I do elsewhere, whether it's through trust and estate work, CPA tax work, it doesn't count. So we didn't think CFA actually had their ducks in order for that, and there were a few governance issues that were kind of all tied up in the whole thing. So it was a bit of a hairy one. I can tell you that I'm not interested in mandatory continuing education for its own purpose, but there is a transformation that is taking place at CFA Institute, and you will start to see this really roll out. Most of us are analytical and trained to be skeptical and not, if hope is not a strategy, trust is, one that's earned. So those 4 barriers, content, tracking, how much it's going to cost me, and then the ability for other things I do to count towards my continuing education. All of those we are dealing with in a very meaningful way. And back to George's comments, George, you took the notes really well at the SLC. We're going to be accountable on it. There's a great sense of urgency, and we want this to be excellent. I can tell you I am entirely excited about our professional learning. One of the things I care deeply about is member value, and that includes our employers, so that we can do a better job for all the for what you're trying to achieve, and the CFA charter holders that you have in your employ, and even those who aren't charter holders, but who we think can do better by participating in the professional learning that we have, whether that's investment foundations, all the way through to specialized training, such as our performance measurement, CIPM certification, our GIP stuff, which is, was really at the vanguard of standardizing performance measurement, right? The Buyers Club demanded that you and I make sure our RFPs include performance standards that were of the highest quality, that were reliable, and that they could compare apples to apples. We are in a transformation. It is enormously exciting. Our education professional learning now thinks about the entire career cycle. So from your charter, from your very early days, all the way through to whatever retirement looks like. I don't even know what it looks like anymore. We're not supposed to call it retirement. I don't know what the new word is. And it's really about competency-based frameworks. It's based on your career cycle. So where you are, an analyst going to a portfolio manager, we've identified those gaps of what you need to do. Our learning is based on those kinds of gaps, how we can help you do that. It's not just CFA content, which is, I know this is going to sound amazing, but we don't know everything. So we're going to use, I know, shocking. The world's best credentialing organization is going to open up and actually have stuff from third parties, societies such as the Atlanta Society will be able to contribute to that. For instance, our UK Society has just launched an ESG certificate. So we know that there are things that people are doing in their local market that can be very relevant. So this partnership with societies and our ability to have our members curate and identify things that are very important for our content. So that being said, that would leave us with the last barrier, and that is that I do not need to attest. I do not need to learn more, and I do not need to attest that I have done other things. So Keith Waite, who heads up our professional learning division, gave me stats, and they're going to be roughly right, not precisely so. Those in our business in India in the last 2 years have upskilled to the tune of 76% of them have. In China, it's 68%. In North America, it's 26%. So back to your point, Marty, regulators are going to require it from us. Our clients are going to require us to demonstrate that we are continuously learning new tools, new techniques, things that serve them better. And finally, countries elsewhere understand that lifelong learning is critical. So wait and see. I think you'll all be really excited about what we're doing. I'm excited. I was actually quite surprised, honestly. So
Sounds very thoughtful.
last question is for you, and it really is, are you hopeful for the future?
Which
In
future about
investment
what?
management.
Okay,
I'm a
good.
Canadian, so I'm
I was
just
getting
gonna
very
say,
worried
like,
there.
Marty and I were talking politics
something
earlier
I
on.
don't
We're
know,
not
but,
going there.
Yes, I could not be more hopeful. And again, it's, we're at this cycle where there's this, the negative pale over much of the industry is palpable. I've never seen it before in my career. The press loves it. Every single day it's a new something, and so it's something we're all dealing with, within our organizations. So let me put context to it. It's an $88 trillion industry, and it continues to grow. It's not going away. If you read the press, you would think that the industry is going to dissolve itself. Not going to happen. There's a fundamental need for investment advice, helping clients, build the portfolios that they need to generate the outcomes that are necessary for whatever they're trying to accomplish in their life, or the pension plan, their sovereign wealth fund. Within it, though, as I said, there is a lot of change going on. So it's really important for all of our respective companies to ensure that we're moving to what is being required of us for our clients, and I think that's happening right now. And it's happening at an incredible pace, and I think that's probably what's most uncomfortable. And I think you had this overlay too. You have this sort of extended market. Much of it was a beta run made it very, very difficult. And it'd be nice if it was just if you had a pretty aggressive sector rotation, that might be a nice thing. But guess what? Get ready for a bear market. I mean, the best thing, frankly, would be a bear market. And we don't want to wish that on anyone, but it's, excuse me.
Can I get that for you?
Yeah, it's my wife.
Hi, it's Marty.
It's actually my CFA son calling me, so.
You passed.
Yeah.
Got it.
I'll tell you another story about that. But so look, it is a challenging time, but it is a great industry, and it's going to continue to grow. And look, everybody that's part of the CFA Society, CFA is a good place to be. The tools are really, really important.
Well, we'd agree with you.
Yeah. I'll tell you one thing. So thinking of, did you pass or not? So I started my career.
I have no pull, just FYI.
Yeah, you probably.
I know, I have no pull. They actually have it in a sequestered zone, which I'm not
bet
even
they
allowed
do.
into.
Yeah, it's not like
CEO, sort of sitting around the CEO.
it's
No,
not,
you don't get in.
It's not the college school scam here, but so as a young person, I was working for John Tupple in the Bahamas as a 14th employee. more importantly, my wife was a 10th. John Templeton said he hired me to keep my wife. That's the first thing. The second thing, though, I was a CPA and said, so everybody's going to be a CFA, and I sit for CFA 1. Again, I didn't spend a lot of time studying. They said, oh, it's all accounting. You're CPA, no problem. So I failed. So how do you think I felt going to John Templeton and saying, I failed CFA 1? So I think CFA stands for can't fail again.
Well, I will say that for me, part of the reason to have this job is the CFA. I had had 5 fabulous starts to 5 fabulous careers before I landed in the business. Didn't know the difference between a stock and a bond, but as soon as I got here, I realized it was really, really something else. And back then, if you didn't have a professional designation, you really were relegated to essentially a secretary.
Yeah.
And the CFA was the game changer for me. But I wrote my first exam. My son was 3 months old, and back then, you'll remember the books were like this thick, and I fell asleep in the exam soundly for the morning exam, and I too failed, but I worked really hard at it. I just absolutely zonked out. And so my son, who's now 26, wrote me the other day, and he said the same thing. He said, Mom, it's okay, there's no trust fund necessary for me. I survived the CFA, and I'm really glad to see you made it all the way through the top. Anyway, thank you. Will you please join me in a